Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's Popanimecomics here with another great podcast with Javier Cruz Winnik. But before we dive into the interview, I'd like to remind everybody there's this con on March 5th called Big Apple Con in New York City. And it looks like it's going to be a great con. Jason David Frank's going to be there. Lori Pretty from Orange is New Black is going to be there. As well as a few wrestlers, including Scott Steiner, the Nasty Boys, and Ryan Shamrock, who was a valet in WWE or slash WWF and WCW. And it looks like it's going to be a great con. It's kind of a small con. There's going to be a lot of cool dealers there. So I recommend you go pick up your ticket. It's a one-day event. Tickets are only $20 at New York City, NYCBM.com. You can purchase your tickets. And it looks like it's going to be a great con. And I hope to see you all there. So without further ado, we're going to dive right into this interview with Javier Cruz Winnik, who will also be going to that con. And you can purchase some of his stuff there if he's selling. I'm not exactly sure, but it looks like he is, and he's got a lot of cool prints and a lot of cool stuff, as well as he's got a great book, A Reason to Smile. So without further ado, you can hear all about A Reason to Smile in this interview, and I hope to see you at the con, everybody. When were you first introduced to art?
I used to watch cartoons. I used to live overseas, and my father was in the military. So my aunt had sent me 2 VHS tapes full of Saturday morning cartoons. And I'm sure you know how VHS tapes were back in the day. You could actually get about 6 hours worth. So from 6 a.m. to 12 in the afternoon, I had the entire run of Saturday morning cartoons on 2 VHS tapes. So seeing those cartoons and all the varieties of shows, the different characters, the different storylines, that made me very intrigued. So I would just start drawing the cartoons that I would see. And that was my first introduction to art.
And at what age did you realize that, hey, I can be an artist and that I want to be an artist?
That happened when I was about 10. I was at a summer camp from the Boys Club of New York, and what they would do is they would have you do academics in the morning, and in the afternoon they would do athletics. So at one of the classes, one of our teachers, he starts the day off telling us, okay, this is my job, this is what I love to do, and I'm very happy. So when you become adults, you're going to need to have a job. It's going to help you pay your bills and take care of your life, and you should be happy doing what you do. So find a job that you love. So that's when I thought about it, and I said, I really love to draw. I'm going to be an artist.
And what were some of your influences at this age?
My first influence that I can remember was Arthur Adams' Asgardian Wars. It's funny that it's starting to come out in a lot of people's conversations lately, but that was the first graphic novel that I ever bought, not realizing that it was a collected edition. But I found this book at St. Mark's Comics in New York, and it was a really large graphic novel, and it gave me a lot of visual information, and it fueled the rest of my drive towards being involved in the comic industry.
Being that you wanted to be an artist at a very young age, how did that affect you throughout the rest of your schooling, in your elementary years as well as your middle school years and into your high school years?
Wanting to be an artist basically determined where I went as a person. I used to always take my sketchbook with me wherever I would go once I finally had one, so people knew me to be the person with the book in his hand. So I always wanted to buy comics or read comics, so people saw me a lot of times in my free time reading comic books as well. You know, the people that I interacted with, the ones that I gravitate towards or would gravitate towards me more, were the ones that also were into comics or into cartoons, and it ended up helping me push where I wanted to go education-wise. First high school that I went to didn't really have a good arts program, so I ended up finding out about an arts program during the summertime, and I would actually go to summer school for art. Even though most of us wanted to go around and play and be free during the summertime, I wanted to get better at art, so I would go to the school for art, and I did that for 2 summers, and then finally got to a better high school that had a good arts program.
And you just mentioned comics. What were you reading growing up? What type of comics?
Mostly the mainstream stuff I could only find in my neighborhood, and a little bit outside of that, there were a bunch of newsstands and some little stores. That's where I would get most of my comics. And Marvel and DC looked like what I was seeing in the cartoons, so that's what I was familiar with and I was comfortable with. I would mostly buy Marvel work, and every once in a while something crazy would happen with DC, and then I would buy a DC book. But I was always more intrigued with the human side of Marvel, much more apparent than what I would see with DC.
And transitioning to a better high school, how did your art style change?
It became more fine arts based. Before I had gotten to the better high school, I was just drawing the comics that I would see and the cartoons that I would enjoy. And then when I finally got to a school that actually had a dedicated art program, we were tasked with doing different assignments that would expose me to different artists at the time that I had never seen before. So I remember one particular assignment, we were asked to do an entire composition that could not include anything but a word that started with the letter I. Or we chose a letter in the alphabet, and then we would put that as our focus. So I had an ibex, sex in the picture. I forget the name of the artist that was the focus of the reproduction that we had to do. So we had to take something from the fine arts past and recreate that drawing and then include other things. So there's an image of a woman reclining on, like, it looks like almost like a futon, but it kind of rises up at the end. And we see her back and she's looking over at the viewer. And that was the image that I was given. And I think the artist's last name started off with an I. So that's what kind of prompted that letter. That was my first introduction into illustration as opposed to just comic book art. And that just continued to grow from there, which ended up getting me into the college that I went to, where I got my BA as a studio artist.
And now, segueing into your college years, how did that further define you as an artist?
I had never really been given direction as an artist. Assignments like that were the only real direction I would get. I wouldn't get told what was working, what wasn't working, what I need to do to improve as an artist. At the time, since I was drawing so much, I was beyond the kids that were there at the school. So my teachers would tell me, hey, you already know what I'm going to teach these kids. They would assume I knew was already being taught. So they would say, hey, here's the assignment. Go off on your own and do it. I'm going to give these kids the attention that they need. By the time I got to college, I thought I just knew what I was doing. And I thought I was already ready to go. And that was my first introduction into design and craftsmanship and a lot of the foundation elements of art as opposed to the pretty finished.
Now, as an artist, you have to eat and you have to sell pieces and you have to survive. What was the very first drawing that you sold and how did you get it sold?
It was my second year of college and I had kind of built a reputation for being an artist, just a guy who loves to draw. I used to draw on people's dry erase boards for fun. And so people had a knowledge of that with me. So one of the girls that would end up becoming one of my friends, she wanted me to do a drawing of her for someone that she was interested in. But she wanted to have it kind of sexy without revealing anything. So I did a portrait of her lying in her bed with a sheet covering her. And that portrait was the first one that I ended up selling. And then from there, I got a couple more commissions. I want to say about maybe 5 commissions throughout my collegiate career.
What was challenging about doing a live piece?
Just trying to make sure that it was as visually accurate as possible. Since I was in the fine arts program, people have that expectation that you're going to draw them how they look. So they want something photorealistic. Thankfully, at the time, I was able to do something that was close enough that she was happy with it. And it helped me to get some more drawings for other people later on.
Now, currently, you're known as a custom illustrator. Can you go into details of what a custom illustrator is? And how did you get into that area of art?
Basically, a custom illustrator is someone who can, when taking upon a client, will create an illustration based off of whatever desires that they have for the final composition. So I've had people asking me to create illustrations that are based off of comic book characters. I had a whole bunch of Spider-Man illustrations in my book. So someone wanted to see my rendition of Spider-Man fighting Kamen Rider, was a character like the Power Rangers from Japan. I've also had people ask me to go as far as drawing their own characters. This one gentleman contacted me about a giraffe that he and his girlfriend came up with, and the giraffe went on a bunch of different adventures and had a bunch of different stories, but this one in particular had the giraffe dressed in sheep's clothing, surrounded by other sheep in like a Norwegian rolling hills background. And the concept of the illustration was that he had gotten into trouble with the mob, so now he was on the lam. So I get anywhere from really cute stuff to really far out there stuff.
And how do people find you as a custom illustrator?
I'm on a few different websites. I'm on Comic Book Art Pros. I'm on comicartcommissions.com. I have my own website. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I'm on all the social media centers. I also go to a lot of different comic book conventions, and people can find me that way and try to get something from me there.
And now as a custom illustrator, you've attended many different cons. What was your first con?
The very first one I went to was the Big Apple Con here in New York City, and it's been a show that was going on for decades, and a lot of different generations have come and gone through that show. And because it was local and it was easy to get to, it was the first one I thought was the best opportunity for me. Ended up giving me that itch that I just had to keep going, and I've been doing shows for 8 years now.
And at these cons, you have many different prints. How did you get introduced to creating prints?
I was always doing the illustrations on my own, whether it was something that someone would want to commission me for. So what I ended up doing was taking these illustrations and bringing them to the different conventions. I started bringing them to Big Apple Con first. I had them in color, and I used to work at Kinko, so I would get them printed there. I didn't really realize what the market was wanting, so I had an 9x12 portfolio. I put all the 8.5x11 prints in there, and then the more that people were taking those home and seeing other artists bringing the larger prints, that's when I transitioned from the 9x12 to the 11x17.
And you do a variety of different prints, one being a very classic traditional of either superheroes or a show like Avatar, The Last Airbender, or Korra. How do you go about creating a classical print versus a mashup print?
That will depend on one of three criteria by which I do my artwork right now. If I'm not doing my own book and I'm doing the illustrations, it's either something that I've just wanted to draw, which is generally the mashup. But if there's a demand where people will come by the table and say, hey, do you have X character? And if I hear that question often enough and I don't have that character available to see, then I'll end up creating that. Sometimes people will actually commission me to do work, and then I'll bring those to the table as well for people to see and enjoy. A perfect example is I did an illustration of the baby Looney Tunes collected together, so it's kind of like celebrating the characters. And the reason for that illustration was because this family couldn't find a baby Looney Tunes theme for their kid's birthday party. So they commissioned me to do this drawing that was a banner behind the birthday cake, and we took each individual character and used them as posters and used that as decorations throughout the party. So I took that illustration, brought it to the show to see how people would react to it, and people seem to be very happy with it. So I make sure that it's at every show that I'm at.
And do you have a formula for choosing which characters, superheroes, or mashups you do?
The mashups are always the funnest part of my job. I want to say that the mashups either are something that come from a love of what I'm enjoying at the time, or recognizing that the masses are really getting into this and I need to find a way to make it work. So another example of that is when the Justice League Unlimited came off the air, I felt like I still needed the Justice League. I wasn't fulfilled enough. So I was still watching a whole bunch of different cartoons, and they were all superhero based. So I decided, hey, why don't I just put these guys together and have them form their own team? So I have an illustration based off of that. And then I noticed that I wanted to try to bring Doctor Who fans over to my table, but they would see my work and say, oh, you don't really have anything Doctor Who based. And that's the only thing I'm really into and why I'm here. So, you have a good day. And they would walk off, and I would end up not being able to engage them because I really didn't have any knowledge or experience with Doctor Who. So I started watching the show, and at the time I was playing Super Mario. In between, I would watch the show. When I was done with that and start playing my games, I'd play Mario. And I had just finished watching an episode of Doctor Who where the Weeping Angels were there. And when I started playing Mario, I just happened to be on a board that had the boos. Now, if you know Mario and you know the boos are the ghosts that when you walk away from them, they follow you. But if you look at them, they cover their face, they stop moving, and that is exactly how the Weeping Angels are in the Doctor Who story. And when I realized that light bulb flashes, and it's like, hey, there's something here. So I started trying to figure out what the connections were between the rest of them. And just for my desire to become a part of this Doctor Who culture and enjoying the game with Mario, I found a new way to have an illustration that can now engage Doctor Who fans and Mario fans. And then that's been another hit that's come off of that.
And now one of your more famous mashups is the Superman vs. Goku print. How did this come about?
J. Scott Campbell, who did the cover for the Wizard magazine, East versus West. It was the first time that I believe that the American public had finally seen in publication a discussion about American comics versus manga and anime comics, and characters, rather. So they would pit different characters against each other. They did Battle of the Planets versus the Batman universe. They did Goku versus Superman. They did a few others. And I said, I really like this idea of how Goku was like the Japanese version of Superman. I don't remember if Woods had said that, but that was what I interpreted it as. So I said, I'm going to put my own touch on this. And Dragon Ball Z holds a special place in my heart because when I was at the first high school that I was at and meeting a lot of Japanese people for the first time, they would bring over their manga and their books. And one of my friends had introduced me to Dragon Ball. Actually, it was Dragon Ball Z, so later. And just seeing the style of drawing in 1991 was completely different than anything that I had seen in America. And I feel like even the way that Dragon Ball Z was drawn was even different from the different animes that I had seen at the time. So I was blown away, and that was one of the things I started drawing a lot. So now seeing this brought into the American pop culture, I thought it was a great thing. So I did my illustration, and I would show that at different conventions when I started doing the conventions. And around 2011, my art style had evolved and had moved into a different place. So I felt like I needed to redraw that drawing. So I had now a new one. And it has been a piece that I make sure that I bring at every show because it always sparks a conversation. It always brings people to the table and We discuss, the differences in the manga universes versus the comic universes, and then, specifically with Goku and Superman. So then became the death battle that happened about a year or two ago, and that put the definitive answer out there that hadn't been addressed. So I was wondering, I was like, is this drawing now going to be a dead issue? So I ended up doing a piece for the Goku fans, because a lot of Goku fans were very upset about the outcome. Overall, it was 70% Goku, 30% Superman in terms of who to win. So I felt like, okay, I got to do a Goku print, an illustration for those fans, and doing that helped to keep that conversation going.
So in drawing a American style and a Japanese hero, did you come across any challenges?
One of the major challenges I always had with Superman was, he's this big, powerful, almost unbeatable character. How do you portray that in an illustration? On top of that, I feel like Superman and Wonder Woman are those type of characters that they have to be the most beautiful, the most attractive out of all the characters as well. Like Superman has to be very handsome, very statuesque, and then Wonder Woman has to be very beautiful, very powerful at the same time. So those two characters have always presented problems for me. I go by the learning curve when I'm online. So like my email address is thelearningcurve@gmail, and I've been on DeviantArt at the learning curve. And I chose that name because I've always wanted to get better as an artist. Everything that I do, I don't want to do the same as I did last year. So when I was trying to get better as an artist and realizing that women were giving me a hard time, like I wasn't drawing women well. So I decided I'd take the cues from one of the artists that I was following that was doing a Wolverine Wednesday. And I said, I'm going to do a Wonder Woman Wednesday, and I'm going to draw Wonder Woman every Wednesday, whether it's a sketch or a full-blown illustration. I wanted to get as much drawn as I could so that way I could practice and get better at it. I realized that with drawing that Superman versus Goku print, I wanted to make his face a certain way. And at the time, it wasn't where I wanted it to be, but it was as far as I could go with it. And thankfully, he was drawn well enough that it hasn't deterred people from taking it home.
And then another one of your mashups is the Powerpuff Girls Justice League Brainiac mashup. How did that come about?
When I first saw the Powerpuff Girls show, it was such a vibrant and energetic show. I was just drawn into it. So I would watch the show and enjoy the different adventures and animation. And one day I just saw it with all their different hair colors. I said, I wonder what would happen if they were actually cosplaying different characters, or even just became different characters for a day. They fit into that superhero best friends forever thing that DC now has as an animation short, and this is the perfect timing for it. This is the time that the DC is putting it out there. Let's go ahead and do this mashup. Perfect timing, and the hair color sparked it all, and then I figured, okay, I have these characters drawn, but I don't want them just to be there by themselves. It's going to be a little boring. Let's put a little drama into it and add the villain into it, overshadowing them. And if I'm going to put Mojo Jojo in there, he has to be Brainiac. He has to be the largest villain, because that's, in my opinion, in their universe, their largest villain.
How is this print received at con?
It's been very well received. A lot of people will pass by the table and it'll make them do a double take, and from little kids to adults, boys and girls see it and they smile from it. So it's been getting pretty good attention. And what's cool is I haven't gotten a chance to do it yet, but there's a site called rayjohn.com that does t-shirts that they fit the entire front and the entire back with an image. And I have an Adventure Time print that is on their site as a t-shirt. The reason why they contacted me was because they saw that illustration of the Powerpuff Girls, and they wanted that to be a t-shirt. So that's going to be one that I'm going to be designing soon that can be available on the site as well.
Now, outside of custom illustrations and prints, you have worked on a book, A Reason to Smile. Can you describe what the graphic novel is about?
So A Reason to Smile is about a little girl who is a walking silver lining. Her name is Luisa Brillante, and this particular graphic novel follows her throughout New York City and the different people that she encountered. And she likes to people watch. She loves to see the differences in people's stature and appearance, from being tall to being short, hunched over, very upright. Take notice of all these things. And as she goes into people watching in the city, they'll create a different story for different people. Hey, that person's walking really fast, and they're avoiding people. Maybe they're late for a flight to a faraway place, or if that person is walking really slow and deliberate, they might have come from like a filling feast. So she'll take notice of these things, and every once in a while she has an opportunity to help some people out. The problems don't go away, similar to what happens in the real world. We all have problems, but because they've worked together, they find that they can deal with the problems a little easier. So what I'm trying to do with the story is bring some fun, take us away from some of the negativity that we see in the world. And even though that negativity is still there, it's like lingering in the background, it's something that we can still deal with and still move on and find a way to still be happy in life.
And obviously you have a very strong female character at the center of this graphic novel. How did you go about creating her as a character?
I used to work in the school system up until about 2012, and I would see the different graphic novels that the children there were reading. And generally, most of them were either mainstream comics or comics that were coming from different publishers. And most of them either had characters that had supernatural connections, which were how they would solve their problems, or they would have superpowers. And oftentimes they would be fighting a bad guy, and once the bad guy was vanquished, then, hooray, problem solved. And I wanted to be able to present the kids another option. I wanted to show them that they didn't have to read a book about powers. They didn't have to have a storyline that was dependent on these supernatural connections, that they could actually read a story about the real world, and because they're kids, use that imagination that they have to create these other elements that they would probably see in their own lives, and from there, they'll be able to have some enjoyment.
And now the book was initially funded on Kickstarter. Why did you choose to go through Kickstarter rather than another platform?
It's the best website for crowdfunding. There is a level of prestige that Kickstarter has that the others have not attained yet. So I felt like if I can make it work on Kickstarter, I could definitely help to push this book further than if I did it on my own. So being able to put it on Kickstarter has a wonderful element where once your campaign has either been funded or not funded, your campaign still stays on their site. So I can always direct someone to the Kickstarter and say, hey, if you look up Kickstarter and you look up A Reason to Smile, you'll see my campaign, you'll see the updates, you'll see how much I made, you'll see the success that this book has garnered before it even got into people's hands. So that's something that I can say, this is what I've done, this is what I can do for you, and what you're becoming a part of, it's something that has some substance and something that you will be proud to have in either your library or in your family's hands.
And how do you feel being part of an indie comic movement on Kickstarter? How do you feel that really helps the comic industry grow?
It's finally giving us the power as opposed to having to ask for the power. I mean, unless you were a creator that created something so radically different and so radically needed that you were trying to push through the dirt to get to the top. And I feel like with Kickstarter, what's happening now is that a lot of creators are now being able to share their voice and not rely on having to work for somebody else. So now if you have an idea, if you have an ability to create a story and you want to put that out there, you can now go through Kickstarter, GoFundMe, or whatever crowdfunding platform you want to use, and it'll help you to gain that capital that you need in order to reach the masses. Because, you can create your story and you can create your artwork and you can have a one shot and it could be in your house, or you can have a few of them that you were able to print and give them to your friends or someone that you know. But being able to get them into the masses is that much harder, because if you don't have the money for it, if you don't have the outreach for it, it's hard to make that happen. So with Kickstarter, you already have this platform that's worldwide, and you can now say, hey, you can now get this story, or you can be part of the creation of the story by helping to get it funded. And then that also gives the fans a sense of power too, because now they can choose what they want to read and what they want to be a part of, as opposed to being told, these are your only options, this is the only thing you can read or the only thing you can watch, and enjoy what you have.
And obviously A Reason to Smile, one book is not enough. When is a second book going to be coming out?
The second book should be coming out soon. I keep telling people dates, and I'm stopping that because I've been putting so much information and so much detail into the story. It's been pushing back. But this book, I feel, as I said before, I like to evolve. I like to grow as an artist. This book will be at least double the detail, double the information. One thing that I was very proud of realizing as I was working on this book is that in the first book, I wanted it a mesh between like a picture book and a graphic novel. So I added panels and I did big splash pages or illustrations that were, help to tell the story. And in the first book, I had 8 illustrations that were full page spread. And then the rest of the pages were, 15 pages that were double page spread. When this book is going to come out, there will be lessen the amount of double page spread. I focused more on the panel work, and now it's going to be more of a comic book and graphic novel style book.
And where can people purchase the first book?
So the first book is available on Amazon.com. If you look up Javier and A Reason to Smile, it'll get you right to the book, and you can purchase it that way. You can always contact me, and that way you can get a signed copy through my email address. It's thelearningcurve@gmail.com with no E at the end of curve. And you can also get them from me at the different comic book shows that I'm going to.
Finally, before we dive into promos, do you have any advice for people who want to get into the comic industry as an artist?
Draw everything. Do not be afraid of what you cannot draw. I feel like that was one of the things that hindered me for a long time, and I would only draw what I was comfortable with, and it took me too long to get to where I'm at because of that, and I didn't have any real mentors that would help guide me in a different direction. So in learning how to get to what I wanted to do, I just would draw what was comfortable. So draw everything, and if you know that you suck at drawing something, draw that even more, because it's going to end up making everything else better.
And finally, do you have anything you'd like to promote? Book, prints, website, Twitter, Facebook, where to buy your work, or upcoming conventions?
A Reason to Smile Volume 2 coming out soon. It was already funded on Kickstarter. It was the second funded campaign. That will be coming out soon, and you can see the progress for the artwork of the book on Instagram. If you look up my email address on either Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Flickr, you'll find my profiles that way. And then if you're on DeviantArt, you can go to thelearningcurve.deviantart.com. You can find me there as well. And as of right now, I'm still trying to flesh out which shows that I'm doing next year. I'm finalizing my application for MegaCon. I'm locked into Big Apple Con. I'm also going to be at the Puerto Rico Comic Con. If you're out in Puerto Rico, you'll see me there. And if you stay tuned to thecurve.com, that's my website, my personal website. I have information on there as it comes up. And then I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com, The Curve. And that'll also have updates as to which shows I'll be at.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast / YouTube video. You can find other podcasts on my podcast channel, Popanimecomics Lounge, either on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher Radio, or anywhere else where you listen to your podcasts. Also, I hope to see you at that con. If you didn't catch where you can purchase your tickets, it's New York City, NYC, BM. You can purchase your tickets there. They're $20. The con's one day, Saturday, March 5th. A lot of cool guests, including Jason David Frank, Lori Pretty, Scott Steiner, the Nasty Boys, and Ryan Shamrock. And I hope to see you there. And it's going to be a great con. Until next time, everybody, have a wonderful, wonderful week.